everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Today we're exploring the UK government's new net zero policy, PPN 0621, for suppliers, and this webinar is hosted by the guest speaker, David Wilshin from Auditel. Once the webinar is finished in the next few days, the webinar will be available on NQA's website and will also be sent to you. Welcome to David, and enjoy the webinar.
Thank you very much, Liz, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for taking the time out this afternoon on this lovely sunny Friday afternoon to join us for PPN 0621, the government policy note, talking about UK suppliers and making net zero possible. So the webinar will last for about 40 minutes, and then there'll be time at the end to cover off any questions you may have. So hopefully you can log some questions in the chat and we can cover them off towards the end of the webinar. So that's kind of the format. So let's get stuck in. So before we get stuck into the policy note, let's have a little look at some of the drivers within our economy for change to net zero. We'll all be familiar with consumer pressure. Can't turn on the television these days without having some environmental sustainability challenge being aired, and I think it's important just to think a little bit about our younger people as well, without going full eco warrior. Clearly young stars coming into business now are much more sustainably minded, and I know my grandchildren, and I'm sure your children and grandchildren are being educated at school at how they can live more in harmony with nature. And so these are your future consumers, your future customers, and your future business leaders. So that pressure is worldwide in the population. But bringing it back to business, if we look at investment, and no doubt in some of your businesses, you will have some private equity investment or other interested parties, or indeed your companies may be in portfolios for fund managers. Well, all of those topics are very much focused on sustainability at the moment. Fund management companies are looking for sustainable portfolios because their customers with their pensions and investments are demanding them. And also, if you have private equity investment in your business, then indeed that can be a factor for considering the environment, and you'll be under pressure from your private equity investor to report on some carbon activity within your business. Another factor which is quite interesting is carbon offsets. You're probably familiar with these, but carbon offsets are means of investing in schemes that are removing carbon from our atmosphere. So we're talking about things like reforestation projects, mangrove swamps, tree planting, lots of different ways of approaching that. And these funds are great. You can buy carbon offsets to become a carbon neutral business. The problem is that there aren't enough projects out there to fix the hole in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. So offsets are a great tool, but we need some meaningful carbon reduction to get to net zero in the timescale that we're looking at. So some factors there, and of course there's some legal reporting legislation. For larger SMEs, you have to include a streamlined energy carbon report in your annual accounts if your turnover is over about 36 million. And there are various other legal requirements, and not least in Europe, some very interesting legislation where there will be tax on businesses supplying products that are not carbon efficient or produced in a way that is reducing our emissions. So this is kind of the backdrop we're in, and we as carbon accountants, Auditel, where's it heading? Where's the future? Well, we can see a future where carbon will be reported on your balance sheet. We're not just talking about pounds and pence now, we're talking about your CO2 emissions and reducing those. So that's kind of the backdrop. But let's get into what the presentation is all about, which is PPN 0621. And this is the UK government position at the moment. So if we turn to government activity in their push to net zero, and they're leading us in that direction, then there are various projects and bodies in place that are working hard to embed a net zero strategy in our economy. So, for example, the greening government commitments, that is for government departments, and it's their commitments during 2021 to 2025 to reduce impact on the environment. And the government buying standards now, they make it a lot easier for government buyers to buy sustainably. So everything is there, and the commitment on climate change is clear for all to see. It's very much that driving procurement behavior as a key enabler to ensure that we do think about carbon in our purchasing decisions. Before we get into the detail of PPN 0621 and what the requirements are, I just want to take a step back with some terminology, and some of you may well be familiar with this, I'm sure, so excuse me just for taking a moment to explain this slide. But what are we talking about when we talk about net zero? What exactly does that mean? Well, one term you might have heard a lot of, and is often interchanged with net zero actually, is carbon neutral. This is a short-term measure, and the offsets I mentioned a couple of slides ago, these are perfect for businesses that are looking to demonstrate carbon neutrality. It's a means of balancing the carbon emissions in your business by investing in these projects, offsetting projects. And it's a great tool, as I've already said, but that is not net zero. Net zero is our long-term goal. It's the 2050 target of reaching a point where global warming is no more than 1.5% above pre-industrial levels. So, and it's arrived at when you've actually removed the equivalent amount of CO2 from your business or organization as you're actually generating. So it's about carbon reduction within your organization rather than investing in other projects that are capturing or reducing carbon. You can't achieve net zero by offsetting, and this is why PPN 0621 is so important and needs to be considered. So let's get on to the policy note, PPN 0621. So it is what it says on the tin then in blue. It's all about taking into account carbon reduction plans in the procurement of major government contracts. So what does that mean? It means the government buyers at the selection stage of your of the process in terms of tenders will be looking for a carbon reduction plan as part of your submission. So this came into effect on the 5th of June 2021. That's when it was published, and it was for tenders from September of that year. It's not retrospective, so it's September 21 onwards. And it was updated actually recently, so it's a working document, and it was updated in April 2023. And as a very high level summary of the requirements, this is what the three areas that PPN covers off. So the first is emissions reporting. You may know that as a carbon footprint, a baseline report, but essentially there are three scopes that you need to include in your submission. And scopes 1, 2, and 3, don't worry too much about those now. We'll come on to those in a bit more detail in a minute. You also need to be reporting your reduction targets. You need a plan for carbon reduction to net zero. So from point now or whenever your baseline was set to 2050. So they need to see these targets, and that's again part of the return. And importantly, a lot of the focus is on the carbon reduction planning. What actually have you got in place in your business to reduce carbon output? So that is the high level view. And excuse me now just for a minute, because this is going to go a bit Wizard of Oz in terms of presentation. So I was really struggling to make PPN 0621 exciting. Next few slides, 3 or 4, are a bit bullet point, bit black and white. That's what I mean by Wizard of Oz. If you've seen it, it starts off black and white, but then we get a bit more technicolor and a bit more exciting, hopefully. So please try and stay awake for the next 3 slides, and then hopefully we'll get into a bit more exciting Technicolor world. But before we do that, Liz, I wonder if you'd be kind enough to put up, we've got a brief poll for you, just a couple of questions. If you're able to put that up, Liz, that would be amazing. I can't see anything. I don't know if anyone else can.
Can you see anything on the screen? I've got some people voting.
Oh, right. Okay. In that case, I'll just be quiet and I'll give people a few moments to vote. I just can't see it. That's all. That's not important. I don't need to vote.
We've got 67% of people have voted, so I'll let you know when we're at 100, and then I can read out the
lovely. Yeah.
You.
Super. As long as it's working, the tech is working. That's great.
So far, it seems to be that scope 1, 2, and 3 is the most popular.
Exactly. Sorry,
answer.
scope 1 and 2 and 3. Yeah.
Yeah. So altogether, that seems to be, and that's 79% of people have voted. So far, it's been 6%.
Do you know the percentage?
Yeah. So 6% of people have been put scope 1. 21% said scope 1 and 2. 41% said scope 1, 2, and 3, and 32% of people said none.
Okay, interesting. Thank you.
Would you like me to close it on screen now?
Yeah, you can close it on screen now. We'll go back to the presentation. If you can let me know when you can see the presentation again, Liz, because I'm a bit blind.
Okay. There we go. I can see the screen, and it seems everyone else can. I think you're all good to go.
And thanks everyone for taking the time to vote there. Right, so let's get into the scope of PPN 0621. So I've already covered off point 1, but it is relevant for contract values in excess of £5 million per annum. So government contracts in that area, and you need to think of it as a cumulative amount. So if you're applying for a contract that perhaps is a £3 million in year 1, and then £6 million in year 2, and £7 million in year 3, then that's still applicable because you take the total value of the contract and divide it by the number of years to get to that sort of £5 million mark. So that's what we're talking about for PPN 0621. Under that, you don't need to complete it. And in terms of scope, as you might expect, it applies to all central government departments. So health, transport, DEFRA, police, and local councils as well. And also in scope are non-departmental public bodies. So NHS, for example, and NHS have recently, I think back in April, just confirmed their commitment to this policy note. So if you're bidding for work in those areas, then this applies absolutely to you. In terms of requirements, well, we need to provide emission reporting for 7 greenhouse gases that are listed in the Kyoto protocol. We'll come on to those gases in a minute. I'm not going to go through them now, but it's not just carbon we're talking about. And you need to set out any measures, any specifications or certifications that you are embarking on or engaged with at this current time. So we'll come on to those as well in a bit more detail, but include those in your report. And the other bit you need to confirm is that the work is ongoing, that these adopted measures will be happening during the course of the execution of the contract. You've not just done something in isolation and then, when the contract date starts, you won't be doing anything. So you need to confirm that within it in the return. And also you need to publish your carbon reduction plan on your website. Now, this is a really important point because it needs to have a prominent link on your homepage and take people through to your carbon reduction plan. So it's there for all to see. So going about this correctly and properly could really enhance your carbon and environmental credentials that people see from your customer-facing websites. So there are more. The carbon reduction plan in the PPN 0621 return needs to be signed off by a director or equivalent, so partner in the business. They must adhere to a standard which is set out in the guidance for PPN 0621. I'm not going to go through the full requirement because it is online for all to see, but particularly important ones are that you need to confirm that your commitment to achieving net zero by 2050. For your UK operations, if you do have any operations abroad, they're out of scope for the purposes of this PPN 0621. And you need to provide your current emission for the sources included in scope 1 and 2 of the greenhouse gas protocol, and a defined subset of scope 3, and we'll come on to what that is all about in a minute. So those are the requirements. May be feeling, or your brain may be feeling a bit like that at this point. Lots of language in there if you're not environmentally minded, or you haven't been into some of the technical language. You may feel a bit like that. Hopefully you're not feeling like that yet, and won't be for the rest of the webinar. And what we're going to try and do now is sort of break this down. So, you know, we've got a problem, we've got a hard problem at the top of the thing. How are we going to deal with this return? What I'm attempting to do over the next few slides is break the elements of what you need to report down and make it into smaller, easier tasks. And that's the whole way to approach this, in my view. Okay, so ready to roll, let's go. 7 greenhouse gases. I don't know how familiar you are with these, and not all will be relevant to your business, but it's a good bit of background knowledge because you're being asked to report on all 7. And we all talk about CO2 and reducing CO2, but the reason we talk about CO2 is it's the lowest common denominator. We have 6 other gases here that are also warming gases in our atmosphere, and actually all 6 are per ton are more damaging than CO2. So, you know, you've got methane. Everyone talks about cows and methane, but it's also used in industrial chemical processes, and of course, it's the main component of natural gas. Nitrous oxide, or laughing gas, as it's commonly known, or if you're a fan of the Fast and the Furious, it's what they inject in the engines to make them go faster when he hits that magic button. But it's also a food additive, and it's a spray propellant found in whipped cream canisters, interestingly enough. And that per ton is 265 times more damaging than CO2 to our environment. The fluorocarbons, they're mostly commonly associated with refrigeration, air conditioning, that kind of thing. And our most damaging per ton gas is sulfur hexafluoride, which is 23,500 times more damaging than CO2. And it actually hangs around in the atmosphere for about 1,000 years, according to our scientists. So that's used in the electrical industry quite widely. The purpose of sulfur hexafluoride in electrics is to stop circuit shorting and prevent accidents. So it does a very good job, but we just want to stop that escaping into the atmosphere. And of course, not all of these will be relevant to every business. So you need to approach it according to, you know, what you do for making your living, and which gases. You know, you're probably going to be looking at the fluorocarbons because you've probably got air conditioning somewhere, and certainly carbon as well. So there are gases, and they're all distilled back to the common denominator, as I said, CO2. So there are plenty of challenges when it comes to doing carbon management in our businesses and organisations. Several factors in play. A lot of the time, you know, there's concern about having a lack of expertise and data within your business. You may not be fortunate enough to have a sustainability team. So, you know, if someone's picking up this job as a kind of side hustle, which is tough. Often conceived as too big a challenge. You know, there's a lot to get stuck into here, and it looks like, as we saw with the problem solving, you know, a big hard problem to get into. Lots of information out there. Confusion is a key factor just in terminology. What's the best course of action? You know, how do I follow a specification to get this right? And businesses quite rightly are concerned about greenwashing. Greenwashing is when you make claims that you can't kind of back up with evidence about your environmental credentials. And a lot of clothing manufacturers, for example, have been called out for that recently. So, you know, you need to be mindful of that. It could be damaging to your reputation if you get this wrong. And there's also a perceived cost with the work you're doing. But, you know, the market forces are there, customer demand. We've already spoken about our changing population and how they are minded to more sustainable products and services. There's legal reporting, which again I alluded to earlier, in play. Think about your competition as well. You know, it may be they're leading on a sustainability agenda. They might have a plan, a net zero plan, and they're including it in their tenders and presentations, not only to government, but also to your commercial customers if you have those as well. But of course, the one we're talking about and the big game changer is the PPN 0621. You know, this is a clear statement of intent from the government on the way that they're going to continue with their procurement services. So I promised you a little insight into these scope 1, 2, and 3. Quite a busy diagram here, but let me just take you through it. So the clouds at the top, they're your 7 greenhouse gases that we looked at a bit earlier on. It talks about scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. So let's just break those down. Scope 1 is here, and this is basically energy that you're burning within your organization. So it would be gas that you're burning in your boilers. It would be if you have company vehicles, so company cars, vans, HGVs, etc. It'll be the fuel that you're burning in those vehicles as they move around the country. That is, as I said, for company-owned vehicles. It's not for your employees or people, or grey fleet as they call it, where you're using your own car. And that's scope 1. And in a way, that's quite easy to get to because the data you need is in your billing. So your gas billing, it's in your, perhaps you've got fuel cards, so you can pull the data from there, or indeed expense records. You can kind of get to that data, get to the calculation of the measurement of the fuel you're using, so whether that's litres, kilowatt hours in the case of electricity, get to the measurement, and then there are government factors which are readily available online, which help you convert that number into a CO2 equivalent. So scope 1 isn't too bad. Scope 2 is equally as easy. The only differentiation here is the energy you're using is not being generated or consumed within your business. So electricity is the best example of that. You know, electricity, it happens in the power stations. You buy it in from the grid, but you're not actually making electricity within your business. So that's called a scope 2 category. And again, electricity bills, you know, they're your source of the information to do the conversion work. Where it gets trickier is when we get into scope 3. So all other indirect emissions that happen within your value chain, your whole value chain, sit in scope 3. And there are actually 15 categories of scope 3. So I'm not going to go through all of them, you'll be glad to hear. And I don't need to, because for PPN 0621, you just have to report on 5. So let's look at the 5. The first is in this area called upstream activities. So this is where you're transporting goods or services into your business to do what you do. So if you're a manufacturer, it's steel, it's aluminium, it's your component parts. If you're a builder or a construction business, it's the raw materials you're bringing into site. So transportation and distribution into your business is the first area you need to report. You also need to report on the waste from your operations. Again, you know, you'll have records within your business, no doubt, from the business that comes in and disposes of your waste. And you might have confidential waste, you might have waste on site if you're building something, you might have just general waste. But the waste from your operations, that's the second area you have to report on for scope 3. The third is business travel. So business travel, we're not talking about your company vehicles here because that's all in scope 1. We're talking about flights, trains, other ways that you've moved around the country to do what you do. So that's category 3 that you need to include for PPN 0621. You also need to report on your employee commuting. So this is probably one of the harder areas to get to, but if you create a survey, it doesn't have to be a lengthy document, 10, 12 questions, send it out to your employees. Basically, you're finding out how far they have to travel each day, how many days they're in the office or at the factory, and how they get there. You know, is it car, train, bike? And if it's a car, is it a small engine car? Is it petrol, diesel? It's that kind of information. If you can gather that and you know, collate that information, you can get to the employee commuting category quite well. And then the 5th and final one is again transportation and distribution, but this time not into your business, it's out of your business. So, you know, if you make something, onward transit of that product into the shops or to the customer, whoever that may be. So that's the 5 scopes within, that's the 3 scopes that you need to report on, and they're the 5 categories within scope 3 that you need to cover. And that's it. So you don't need to worry about the other 10 categories within scope 3 unless you really want to get stuck into that. And a lot of businesses do, but we won't, it's not for today. Okay, so gathering all this information, you've done all of that, how do you report it? Well, there is a carbon reduction plan template out there up on the internet, on the government pages. The bits, you don't have to read all of this, but the bits highlighted in yellow are basically advice, instructions from the government as to how to fill in the forms. So there's a template there. You don't have to create something fabulous to fulfill the requirement. Use the template, and it's this is a bit more about how it looks. So on the left-hand side, that box there, you can see that's your baseline emissions footprint. So that'll be the year you started reporting. So you might have started this kind of activity. For those of you that said yes to scopes 1, 2, and 3, you might have started this activity a year or 2 or further ago, and you'd use that initial report as your baseline. The idea is they can see where you started, and then on the right-hand side, by reporting on the emissions, the current emissions, I'm sorry, then they can see how you're progressing in terms of your journey so far. So it's all out there. The template is there. It's just you know, getting those calculations done, and then you've got a way of reporting. So that's an overview of the reporting side of it. Let's have a little look at the emission reduction targets. So the way that businesses should be approaching a net zero strategy is by putting a carbon measurement tool overarching your activity. What do I mean by that? Well, we're talking about science-based targets here. So this is where you are saying, right, here I am on this graph. The company started in 2022. That was their first year when they measured their carbon footprint, and they came up with a ton CO2 equivalent figure. And that's the big bar on the left-hand side. That company is now saying, right, my objective by 2050 is to become a net zero business. So each and every year between 2022 and 2050, I'm going to achieve a carbon reduction activity. And this is a simple sort of linear graph. You're essentially reducing by an equivalent percentage each year the amount of CO2 emitted by your business. But this for me is the scary bit, because actually people say to me 2050, that's miles away. And I'm saying, well, think about it. If you approach it in this way, where each year you are making the same reduction in terms of percentage in your business, you'd actually have to reduce your carbon emissions by nearly 8%, 7.9% year on year to achieve that net zero target. So the longer you delay, the tougher that objective is going to get. But that's what they mean by setting that kind of emissions target. And then you can track it. So here you see the target emissions are the straight blue line there, and then each year you revisit your target emissions and you map your actual achievement by calculating again on an annual basis your carbon footprint, so you can identify on this graph how you are reducing over time and how you're performing against your target to achieve net zero by 2050. Oh, that's a little bit about the emissions targeting. And then the third and final part is carbon reduction projects. And these are the key parts of any reduction plan, and PPN 0621 will be looking at these closely. So you're explaining the activities that you have embarked upon. It might be to do with electrifying your fleet. It might be putting solar on your buildings, looking at heat pumps, all manner of sort of renewable and energy production processes that reduce your requirement from the grid. And you should include any climate action bodies that you might have signed up to. So PPN 0621 refers to SBTI. SBT is the science-based target, not to be confused with what we've just looked at, but this is actually an organization that you can sign up to, and they can assist you with your requirements in terms of setting targets and achieving them. And also PPN 0621 also refers to some really good specifications, some frameworks, if you like, that you can follow right through your journey from now to 2050 to deliver the carbon reduction that you aspire to achieve. So these schemes are really useful tools. There's ISO 14001, which some of you may have. There's a subcategory of that, 14064, which is really focused on the carbon reduction side of things, and then the 14001 gives you your environmental management systems, and also PAS 2060, which is specifically focused on carbon measurement and carbon reduction. So PPN 0621, the guidance, they say, look at these if you really want to get stuck into your carbon emissions and a net zero strategy. These are really useful tools. So we're just going to spend a little bit of time. I haven't got time to go through ISO 14001 and PAS 2060, but I've got an overview of PAS 2060 because we quite like this this certification approach to keep you on the journey for the PPN return. So it sets out clear standards for carbon. It requires you to go beyond 1 and 2 emissions, so you need to look at scope 3. You can't achieve the specification just by offsetting, so again, it drives carbon reduction mindset. It can be independently verified as well. If you really want to sort of go to town and get a kite mark for PAS 2060, then organisations I would recommend, NQA perhaps, they'd be able to independently verify your work. It's a great tool from that respect. And if you look at the 9 grades of carbon reporting, which is in this slide here, it sits into the high level quality in terms of the quality of reporting. So if we said level 1 was, I don't know, a online calculator that's free, and it'll give you kind of an indication way of what your carbon footprint is, that's sort of got little value because you're not verifying the data going in and you don't know what the algorithms look like, etc. But PAS 2060, that ensures that you look in detail to the standard at scope 1 and 2, and also as a bare minimum, categories 1, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 9, and 5 of those 6 categories are ones which are applicable to PPN 0621. So great tool. It's a fairly simple process in terms of how you follow the specification. So firstly, you measure, so that relates to your baseline or carbon footprint we talked about earlier. You then put in carbon reduction plans. So from the measurement, you will identify emission areas where you can potentially make some carbon reduction activity. And so you then put that together in a plan, which is obviously something you can transfer into the PPN 0621 framework. And if you want to, you can kind of stop there until the next year. But some businesses, as I said, like to go for an independent third-party verification, in which case you need to do some offsetting, which we referred to earlier. And of course, you would need to get it verified by a third party. And then you can put the PAS 2060 kite mark on your website, include it in your presentations and such like. But the actual process of measuring and reducing, that really is the key driver of PAS 2060, and that directly correlates to the PPN 0621 objectives. And because it's a sort of rinse and repeat process, you know, in year one, you produce your baseline, you put your reduction actions into place. In year two, you come back, you remeasure your baseline, and you identify the reduction that you've achieved in that year. Hopefully your baseline will have come down, and you can report that on your science-based target graph to say this is what we've achieved this year. And then you start with a new baseline, go into year two, more carbon reduction actions, and so on, right the way through to 2050. So it's a great way of managing your progress towards net zero. And then there's opportunities where you can sort of socialize your achievements. So you can put together a carbon footprint report with all the details and have a sort of section on your website there. And obviously, when you actually get the verification, the carbon neutrality verification, then you know, that's a great thing to be announcing to your clients and internally as well. You know, and socialize within your business. Employees like to see that they're working for a sustainable business. A growing number of employees will be really engaged with what you're doing here. So that's a very brief run through of PAS 2060, one of the PPN 0621 recommended frameworks that you can use. And the really good thing about it, if you are so minded and you are into DIY, is you can do exactly that with this specification. You do not need to pay a consultant to come into your business and do it for you. If you have if you're minded to do it internally yourself, you absolutely can. You can buy this specification for the princely sum of £124, I think, plus VAT. Just go to this website, the SI website, and you can download it there. And you've got everything you need there to embark on this PAS 2060 journey that I've been talking about. Just one word of warning though, just before you do this, have a serious think about whether you've got the internal resource to work through the specification, because there's a lot of data gathering, there's a lot of calculations involved. You might bite off more than you can chew. So just have a think of that first, because you know, absolutely, you don't want to be you don't want this to be the last DIY job you ever do. Okay, so takeaways before we go. Firstly, congratulations, you have survived. For those of you still awake and engaged, I thank you, and I hope that was a useful summary for you. My just sort of summary and conclusions from putting this together is: start by thinking about your strategy and what your organization wants to achieve. Are you simply looking to be a compliant business, one that, if you like, ticks the box, and there's nothing wrong with that, ticks the box for the PPN 0621 requirement, you know, scopes 1 and 2, the subcategory of scope 3, the five subcategories? If you want to do that, great, that's absolutely fine. But if you're thinking more along the lines of longer term, maybe you're thinking more about your overall strategy for achieving net zero by 2050, looking at your operations, looking at your whole value chain, really getting into the strategy element of what you want to do, then I would recommend considering, if you don't already, the ISO 14001 and indeed 14064, or indeed, of course, the PAS 2060 specification. I'd have a look at those. They could be your friend over the long term, if that makes sense. And of course, we have here the link to PPN 0621. So you will find on there, it's a really useful resource, because not only does it tell you what you've got to do as a supplier and what you have to report and how you should report it, but it also has up there guidance for the government buyers as well. So there's guidance for them on how they should review your report and how they should assess it and how they should evaluate it. So you can kind of see their point of view and where they're coming from by looking at the guidance for the actual government departments. So that should really be, I guess, if PPN 0621 is relevant for you, that should be your next port of call, and you'll be able to get some really good guidance on how to proceed. So that's it. Thank you very much for taking the time out. For those that you are cricket fans, you can get back to the Ashes. I think we lost 3 wickets last time I looked, and further afield, yeah, get back to your days. So thanks for listening. That's me, David Wilshin, Carbon Auditor. Contact details are there, so if you've got any questions, any follow-up questions you don't want to talk about in this session, then feel free to get in touch. And that's it, Liz. So I guess, can we go back on camera, or do we just sit where we are on the final screen there?
Well, yeah, the final slide is absolutely fine, and we've got some questions as well from the attendees. So if you're happy, I'll just read them out, and I'm sure you'll be able to answer them as our resident expert.
I'll do the best I can. I can't guarantee I'll know everything, but I'll try my best.
So one of the questions was from Sarah Peake. She said, schools and educational facilities, would they also be included? I think, Sarah, please put in the box if you do mean something else, but I think she's referencing whether they would be included like as suppliers.
Suppliers? Okay. Interesting. I mean, the general guidance is that the PPN 0621 will be applied pretty much blanket across all tenders. From what I've read, there was nothing specific referring to schools, but there are some exclusions to the requirement, but I think they were mostly kind of defense related. So, you know, we're not really going to talk about carbon when we're talking about building a jet. So I don't know of an exception for schools as suppliers. Yeah, but I'm happy to research that further and see if I can give you a clearer answer.
Thank you. And so Kieran has asked, when reporting electricity, should we take the market base or the location base?
The location base. So you are looking, when you're reporting electricity, say you've got 6 locations, you want to get the billing for each of those locations for the year, the reporting year, total up your kilowatt hours, and that's what you use to then put into the government conversion factors to get your CO2.
Thank you. And Andrea has 2 questions actually. So the first one is, what is the relationship between PPN 06 and PAS 2080?
Right, okay, so PAS 2080, I'm just trying to remember that. Let me just have a little think about PAS 2080 and how that's relevant to PPN 0621. It's not referred to in the guidance, is number 1. So it's not one that they are suggesting is a good guide, but it's still carbon reduction activity. So yeah, I think PAS 2080 will be relevant, but I think the reason they've referenced 2060, it is more relevant, if that's helpful. But they are related, and so there will be work you've done if you've used the 2080 standard. Then you know, in building an infrastructure, then you will of course have achieved some of the general carbon reduction goals that are relevant to this. So, but PAS 2080 is very much relating to the infrastructure of buildings, as far as I'm aware. PAS, there are other standards for actual construction of buildings and stuff like that, and carbon there. So it's quite specific, if that's helpful.
Okay, thank you. And Andrea's actually posted in the chat saying PAS 2080 is the project-based version of 2060 and is being asked for as part of government tenders.
Oh, well, thank you. I've learned something today. I appreciate that. Thank you, Andrea.
And then their second question was, will they be able to submit a PPN 06 report if they haven't signed up to SBTI? They are very expensive and they have PAS 2060 in place instead.
All right, can you just repeat that one at the start? I just missed the first bit of it. I think it's my microphone.
Yeah, sure. So Andrea is asking whether they would have to submit a PPN 06 report if they haven't signed up to SBTI. The reason being that SBTI is very expensive and Andrea already has PAS 2060 in place.
Great. Andrea, I think you're in a super place there. No is the short answer. SBTI is not a requirement. It's just a suggestion. If you've already got PAS 2060 in place, you're in a super place to use all of that to complete your PPN 0621. You don't have to sign up to SBTI. I agree, it's very expensive. There is a distinct difference between a science-based target and the organization SBTI. You can follow science-based targets, as I showed earlier on, hopefully, with those graphs without having to sign up to SBTI.
Fab. And David Prescott is asking, can scope 3 emissions be double counted? For example, one company's scope 3 equals another company's scope 1 and 2?
Short answer is yes, it can be, which is challenging. If you are looking at it from looking at your suppliers, for example, and obviously your suppliers in your scope 3, engage with them. They may be doing some work that is reducing their carbon. To give you an example, if you have a contract with a courier company, some courier companies now have been through a process, it might be PAS, carbon offsetting, that actually demonstrates they are carbon neutral businesses. And you can, if they have done that, and they've done that to a specification, you can effectively ring fence that and say, well, I don't need to report that as one of my CO2 emissions because I'm engaged with a supplier who is already negating their emissions for the element of work that they do for me. So yeah, there is a challenge around double counting, but start by engaging with your suppliers and see what work they're doing already.
Got it. And Andrew Finney said, we asked, how do you achieve reducing emissions in a growing business, i.e. emissions per increase in revenue emissions per pound in revenue may be falling, but if revenue is increasing, then presumably CO2 will as well.
Yeah, overall CO2 will. What you can do within the 2060 specification when you're reporting is you can report your emissions by employee number, by pound of turnover or £1 million of turnover, probably more relevant. So it allows for companies that are scaling up and growing. If you've got 50 employees and you've got 100 tons of CO2 and then it's 100 employees and 200 tons of CO2, the ratio is still the same. So that's the way it should be reported to allow for businesses that are in growth phase. Yeah.
And Eamon Clinton has asked, he was told by a client that SBTI only requires a review of the baseline every 5 years. Do you know if this is true?
I don't think it's every 5 years. I think it's more regular than that. I can't think off the top of my head what it is, but I would also say just before you get to, I suppose, entwined with the organisation SBTI, just do a bit of research. They've come under a bit of flack recently from the scientific community. There's been a letter signed by a lot of very clever people, far cleverer than me, doctors who have criticised some of their verification processes. They're doing something about it. Don't get me wrong. This isn't an SBTI knocking session. They are doing something about that and correcting things. So their processes are quite fluid at the moment because they are improving things in response to that scientific criticism. So, I just check that before you get stuck into that.
And Joe Leggett has asked, should CRPs contain details on calculation methodologies or stick exactly to the template format?
Sorry, Liz. I'm just going to ask you to do that again. I did get it just cut out. I think I'm having a few internet problems.
No, sorry. Joe Leggett asked, should CRPs contain details on calculation methodologies or should they stick exactly to the template format?
The template format is there to report your results. The methodology in terms of doing the calculations, you should be using government-approved factors which are published by DEFRA, and you can Google that. You will find a spreadsheet. It's accessible to all, and it has conversion factors in there that DEFRA release on an annual basis. So use those for your calculations. You kind of, in the simplest terms, if it was fuel and you've used 10,000 litres of fuel during the year and it's diesel, you find the conversion factor for diesel, multiply your number of litres by the conversion factor, and that gives you your CO2 output, and that's the number that you put in the report in the template. But yeah, Google the DEFRA GHG factors, and you'll find it.
Thank you. And oh, sorry, Sarah Peake, who asked a question earlier about schools and educational institutions, she's followed up the chat and she said, in the context of, would PPN 0621 be applied to schools like it is to the NHS?
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a good point. I don't think, from what I recall on the guidance, it's anything specific about that. It would make sense if they are, local council government, local council, obviously not private schools, that would be excluded. But if they are, local council run, local government run, it would make sense. But I can't be 100% sure on that. So can I take that away? Is that all right? Who should I come back to on that?
It is Sarah Peake. What I can do is I can send you her email and then you can follow up with it.
If Sarah's okay with that, yeah, please do, rather than me sort of stumble around for an answer. Let me just research it and I'll come back to her on email.
Okay, perfect. I will I'll send your email over to Sarah in that case, and then
yeah, that's great. Yeah, please do.
Yep, perfect. Okay, we've just got a few more. So Chris Penn, you're talking about location-based or market-based. He said that by market-based, the person was referring to if green tariff applicable to electric, then can they record it as 0 rated and report both location and market-based?
If it is a green tariff and it's 100% renewable energy, then yes, you're good. You can report as 0. Just be absolutely 100% sure it is 100% renewable energy, because there are tariffs out there which have a percentage renewable energy. So just be careful of that before you do state it as 0.
Cool. And just to confirm, that's for both location and market-based, correct?
I need to clarify what exactly we're talking about with market-based. I'm not overly familiar with that. My apologies.
Okay.
I don't know if you've got time in the chat to just tap that, or
yes, if Chris is still in the call and can put it in the chat.
If Chris is still there, sorry, Chris. Yeah.
If not, what I'll do is when I send out the PowerPoint slides, it has your email at the end, so any follow-up questions can be sent out.
Yeah, anything I've not been quite clear enough on, or anyone wants any clarification and those questions around the schools and the market base, then absolutely just ping them over and I'll get into a bit more detail.
Okay, perfect. And the last question is from Mary Fannon, who's asked if we can talk about the question about PAS 2060 and PPN 0621. I think it was the relationship. Sorry, I think she meant when we questions like what is the relationship between PPN 06 and PAS 2080?
So we had the question earlier, didn't we, about PAS 2080, which my understanding is that's more is specific for building and infrastructure, but PAS 2060 is specific for carbon neutrality. They're two in my mind, quite different things. But I think it was Andrew had the point about the way they were related. So I don't quite, that doesn't quite compute in my brain. Maybe I'm missing something. But the reason we talked about PAS 2060 and ISO 14001 is because those are the two standards that PPN 0621 refers to in their guidance. They're the only two they refer to. So that's why they were in the presentation as the most relevant.
Great, thank you. I think that's all the questions for now. So thank you everyone for attending the webinar. We hope to see you again at another webinar hosted by NQA. And what I'll do is I will send out the webinar slides over the coming days so that you can watch it on repeat. And yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to get in contact either with NQA or with David, whose email address will be in the PowerPoint slides. So thank you very much, and thank you, David.